The summer of 1874 had been merciless to Cedar Ridge, a forgotten town clinging to the eastern slopes of the Colorado Rockies. The earth lay cracked in bleeding red dust, while hot winds carried the taste of iron and despair through streets that seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the sun. Even the mountains appeared to lean away from the settlement, as if ashamed of what transpired in their shadow. Rosalie May Thornton stood before the cracked mirror in her aunt's spare room, her trembling fingers attempting to secure the yellowed lace veil that had belonged to her mother. The dress hung loose on her frame, a borrowed garment from a cousin who'd married 3 summers past, when hope still bloomed in this desolate place. Through the thin walls, she could hear her uncle's voice, thick with whiskey and satisfaction, counting coins with the man who would claim her within the hour. 20 head of cattle and the debt's cleared, Uncle Silas declared. The girl comes willing enough. Knows her duty? Rosalie's reflection wavered in the glass. Willing. The word tasted of ash. She'd spoken no consent, signed no paper. Yet here she stood, adorned for a wedding she'd learned of only 3 days prior. The stranger who'd bought her. For that's what this was. No matter what pretty words they wrapped around it, hadn't even troubled himself to court her. She'd glimpsed him once through the kitchen window, a thick-set man with cold eyes and hands that moved too quickly, too carelessly, as if everything he touched was already broken. The ceremony took place in the dusty yard behind the First Methodist Church, the real sanctuary being too fine for the likes of a debtor's niece. Reverend Hollis read from his worn Bible with the enthusiasm of a man reciting a grocery list. The townsfolk gathered not from joy, but from the peculiar hunger that feeds on others' misfortune. Rosalie recognized most faces. The merchant's wife, who'd once been kind when her parents lived. The blacksmith who'd turned away when Uncle Silas dragged her from her family's burned homestead. The saloon girls who watched with knowing eyes. Her bridegroom, one Josiah Briggs, as she'd learned only moments before the vows, reeked of trail dust and something sourer. His thick fingers crushed hers as he slipped on a tarnished ring, and his smile held all the warmth of a snake's regard. He spoke his vows like a man concluding a business transaction, which, Rosalie supposed, he was, "You may kiss your bride," the Reverend intoned. Briggs leaned in, his breath hot and rancid against her face. His lips barely brushed hers before he pulled back, already turning to Uncle Silas. "Papers are signed. Debt's cleared." He tossed a leather pouch that landed with a heavy clink. "I'll be taking my leave now." The crowd stirred, confused whispers rising like dust devils. Rosalie stood frozen, the phantom touch of his lips still polluting hers. "What about your bride?" someone called out. Briggs was already mounting his horse. He looked back once, his grin sharp as a blade. "Bought and paid for, ain't she? But I've got business elsewhere. Maybe I'll come collect her when I'm ready. Maybe I won't." He spurred his mount and disappeared in a cloud of red dust, leaving Rosalie standing alone in her borrowed dress. The laughter started slowly, like the first drops of rain after drought, hesitant, then building to a deluge. Her aunt's shrill cackle led the chorus, followed by Uncle Silas's whiskey-soaked guffaw. "Look at her, standing there like a scarecrow. Couldn't even keep a man's interest long enough to bed her. Must be something powerful wrong with a woman if her own husband runs off before the wedding night." Rosalie's legs trembled, but she would not fall, not before these people. She tried to move, to flee this circus of humiliation, but rough hands seized her arms. Uncle Silas, his face flushed with drink and cruelty, held up a length of rope. "Can't have you running off, girl. You're a married woman now. Gotta learn your place." The crowd roared approval as he bound her wrists, the rope burning against her skin. "Let this be a lesson about knowing your worth." They left her there in the churchyard as the sun began its descent, tied to the fence post like the livestock, her wedding dress dragging in the dirt. Some threw pebbles, others simply pointed and laughed. The children were called away by their mothers, but not before getting their fill of the spectacle. As shadows lengthened and the crowd finally tired of their sport, Rosalie let her head fall forward. Tears she'd held through the ceremony finally came, hot and bitter. This was to be her life then, A cautionary tale told in whispers. The girl so worthless her own husband abandoned her at the altar. The sound of boots on gravel made her tense. Another tormentor come for their entertainment. But these footsteps were different, measured, deliberate, lacking the drunken swagger of the townsfolk. She raised her head to see a figure emerging from the deepening twilight. He was tall and lean, moving with the controlled grace of a man accustomed to silence. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a face that might have been carved from the mountain stone. His clothes were simple, worn leather and faded cotton that had seen many miles. A cavalry hat hung from his saddle horn, and the way he wore his gun spoke of long familiarity with violence. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, gray as winter storm clouds. They held neither mockery nor pity as they took in her bound state. Instead, she saw something she couldn't name, a recognition, perhaps, of one damaged soul greeting another. Without a word, he drew a knife from his boot. Rosalie flinched, but he merely cut through her bonds with 2 clean strokes. The rope fell away, and she rubbed her raw wrists, unable to speak. "Your shame is over," he said quietly, his voice rough as creek gravel. The words seemed to come from some deep place, as if he spoke to himself as much as to her. Panic flooded through her. A strange man, the approaching night, her reputation already in ruins. She backed away, ready to run though she had nowhere to go. "I mean no harm," he said, holding up empty hands. "Name's Elias Ward. I've got a place up the mountain. Nothing fancy, but it's shelter and a hot meal." He paused, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "Unless you'd rather stay here for tomorrow's entertainment." She looked back at the town, where lamplight began to flicker in windows like predatory eyes. Come morning, they'd find new ways to torture her. Her uncle would rage about the lost bride price. The whole county would know of her humiliation by week's end. "Why?" The word came out cracked, barely audible. Elias was already turning back to his horse, a rangy gray that stood patient as its master. Because no one else did. The simplicity of it, the lack of expectation or demand, nearly broke her. She looked once more at Cedar Ridge, at the life that had never wanted her, then followed the stranger into the gathering dark. His horse's hoofbeats rang hollow on the hard earth as he led the way on foot, she stumbling behind in her ruined wedding dress. The mountain path wound upward through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen, the air growing cooler and cleaner with each step away from town. Neither spoke during the climb. Elias moved with sure feet despite the darkness, occasionally pausing to ensure she still followed. Rosalie focused on putting one foot before the other, her thin shoes offering little protection against stones and roots. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than one, yellow light glowed through the trees. The cabin materialized from shadow, a simple structure of hewn logs and chinked gaps, with a stone chimney already sending up smoke. It perched on a small plateau, backed against the mountain's protective bulk, with a clear view of the valley below where Cedar Ridge squatted like a festering wound. Inside proved as austere as the exterior, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, and a fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls, but it was clean and warm, and blessedly free of judging eyes. Elias moved about with quiet efficiency, setting water to heat, laying out a simple meal of beans and cornbread. He pulled a bundle from a trunk and set it on the table, a plain cotton dress and shawl, clean but mended in places. "They'll do better than what you're wearing," he said without looking at her. "I'll step outside while you change." When the door closed behind him, Rosalie finally allowed herself to breathe. She peeled off the wedding dress with shaking hands, letting it pool on the floor like shed skin. The simple dress was too large but comfortable, and she wrapped the shawl tight around her shoulders. She found him sitting on the porch step, smoking a pipe and watching the stars emerge. The wedding dress lay bundled in her arms. "Burn it," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He took the bundle without comment and fed it to the flames in the yard's fire pit. Together they watched the lace and lies turn to ash and drift away on the mountain wind. as the last of it crumbled to nothing. Rosalie felt something inside her chest ease. Just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias knocked his pipe against the step and stood. "Get some rest. World will look different come morning." As she curled beneath a worn quilt that smelled of cedar and safety, Rosalie wondered if he spoke truth or merely hope. But for tonight, in this rough cabin with a stranger's kindness, the only thing standing between her and the abyss, she chose to believe him. Dawn came slowly to the mountain, painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold while the valleys still drowled in shadow. Rosalie woke to unfamiliar sounds, the pop of pine logs in the fireplace, the whistle of wind through chinks in the walls, and the quiet movements of someone who'd learned to walk softly through the world. Elias stood at the stove, his back to her as he worked over a cast-iron skillet. The smell of frying bacon and coffee made her stomach clench with hunger. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten a proper meal. Uncle Silas had kept her on bread and water since announcing the marriage, claiming a bride should be purified for her wedding day. "Morning," Elias said without turning. He'd known she was awake. Then, "Food's nearly ready." She sat up slowly, the quilt clutched around her shoulders. In daylight, the cabin revealed more details. A rifle mounted above the door, books stacked on a shelf, a cavalry jacket hung on a peg. The space spoke of a man who lived alone by choice. Everything in its place. Nothing superfluous. He set a plate before her, bacon, biscuits, and beans, along with a cup of black coffee. The first bite nearly undid her. Simple food, but prepared with care, offered without obligation. She ate slowly, aware of his eyes on her, gray and unreadable as morning mist. "I'll need supplies from town in a few days," he said finally. "You can ride along if you've a mind to return." Return? To what? The mockery? The uncle who'd sold her like cattle? The husband who'd abandoned her for sport? She set down her fork, appetite gone. "I have nowhere to go." He nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Then you'll stay until you do. There's work enough to earn your keep, cooking, mending, tending the animals. I'm not offering charity, and I'm not asking for it." The words came out sharper than intended, but he merely inclined his head in acknowledgement. The first days passed in careful routine. Elias left each morning to tend his small herd of cattle and check trap lines. Returning near dusk, Rosalie threw herself into the work he'd outlined, cooking meals, patching clothes, feeding the chickens he kept in a small coop. The labor felt like penance and salvation both. Each completed task a small victory against the voice in her head that whispered of worthlessness. They spoke little. Elias seemed comfortable with silence, and Rosalie found relief in the absence of questions. He never asked about the wedding, about Briggs, about why her own family had bound her like an animal. She never asked about the nightmares that sometimes woke him, or why a man who moved like a soldier chose to live alone on a mountain. On the fourth night, restlessness drove her from the cabin. The moon hung full and bright, turning the world silver and strange. She'd meant only to step onto the porch, but her feet carried her farther, down the path toward the valley overlook. The night air bit through her shawl, but she welcomed the sharpness. It cut through the numbness that had wrapped around her since the wedding. She didn't hear the wolves until they were almost upon her. 3 shadows materialized from the underbrush, yellow eyes gleaming with ancient hunger. Rosalie froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. They circled slowly, testing, patient as death itself. The largest, a scarred male, lowered his head and bared teeth like white knives. The rifle shot cracked through the night like thunder. The alpha wolf yelped and fled, his pack following. Elias emerged from the shadows, weapon still raised, his face carved from stone. "Fool woman," he said quietly, but his hands were gentle as he checked her for injury. "These mountains don't forgive carelessness." "I couldn't breathe," she whispered. "The walls, the silence, I couldn't breathe." Something shifted in his expression. He lowered the rifle and stepped back, giving her space. "I know that feeling, like the world's gotten too small and you'd rather face wolves than walls." They stood there in the moonlight, 2 damaged souls recognizing their shared fractures. Finally. He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll make tea." Back inside, he busied himself at the stove while she huddled near the fire. When he handed her a cup, she noticed his hands trembling slightly, the only sign of how frightened he'd been. "You asked why I helped you," he said, settling into the opposite chair. "Truth is, I saw myself in that churchyard, different circumstances, but the same look, like a trapped animal that's given up fighting." "What happened to you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He stared into the fire for a long moment. "Shiloh, Gettysburg, a dozen other battles that blurred together. I was cavalry, 12th Illinois, good at killing. They said, too good." His voice went flat. "Empty. War ended. But the killing didn't, not in my head. Came home to find my brother dead, took his own life while I was off playing soldier. His wife blamed me, said if I'd been there." He trailed off, lost in memory. "That wasn't your fault," Rosalie said softly. "No? I chose to enlist. Chose glory over family." He met her eyes then, and she saw the weight he carried. "Sometimes the worst prisons are the ones we build ourselves." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. "Finally," Rosalie spoke. "You're not ready for that world yet. That's what you said when I tried to leave." "Neither of us is," he admitted. "Maybe that's enough for now." The days grew into a week, then 2. Rosalie learned Elias's patterns. How he took his coffee black but added honey to his biscuits. How he favored his left shoulder on cold mornings from an old wound. How he sometimes stood at the window watching the valley below, as if waiting for an enemy advance. She learned the mountains, too. The way morning mist clung to the hollows like secrets. The places where snow lingered even in late summer. White wounds against dark stone. The cry of hawks circling on thermals. The rustle of deer moving through aspen groves. The profound silence that was not empty, but full of breathing life. One evening, as she prepared supper, Elias appeared in the doorway with something in his hands. "Found this in town today," he said, setting a package on the table. "Figured you might have use for it." Inside was fabric, soft blue cotton sprigged with tiny flowers. Not fancy, but new and clean and chosen with thought. She ran her fingers over it, throat tight with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she managed. "No thanks needed, just thought." He shifted uncomfortably. A woman should have something that's hers, something that wasn't borrowed or handed down or given with conditions. That night, as she cut and pinned the fabric by lamplight, Rosalie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not quite happiness, that seemed too large a word, but a small, warm thing that might grow into happiness given time and tending. Hope, perhaps, or simply the absence of despair. She began to speak more over their shared meals. Small things at first, memories of her mother teaching her to sew, her father's laughter before the fever took him, the garden she'd kept before Uncle Silas decided such work was too good for a burden like her. Elias listened without judgment, occasionally offering his own fragments, a horse he'd raised from a colt, books he'd read during the long winter nights, the view from his favorite ridge at sunrise. One night, thunder rolled across the mountains like artillery fire. Rain lashed the cabin walls, and wind howled through the gaps like wounded things. Elias went rigid at the table, his knuckles white around his coffee cup. She recognized the look. She'd seen it in the mirror too often. Memory's ambush, when the past reached through time to sink its claws deep. Without thinking, she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He jerked as if burned, but didn't pull away. They sat like that as the storm raged. Two people who'd forgotten the comfort of human touch, relearning its language in careful increments. When thunder cracked directly overhead, he turned his hand palm up and laced their fingers together. His grip was careful, as if she might break or flee, as if he might. "Thank you," he whispered, and she knew he meant for more than just this moment. "You saved me first," she replied. He shook his head. "No, we're saving each other." The storm passed, leaving the night washed clean. They released hands slowly, reluctantly, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained began to shrink, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous, more necessary than either had expected to find in their mountain refuge. That night, Rosalie lay awake listening to the rain's gentle aftermath, one hand pressed to her chest where something new and terrifying and wonderful had taken root. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. And for two people who'd believed themselves beyond saving, possibility was everything. The blue cotton dress fit perfectly, as if Rosalie had been measured for it. She smoothed the skirt with work-roughened hands, marveling at how different she looked in the small mirror Elias had hung by the door. Not the frightened girl in borrowed wedding finery, nor the burden her uncle had sold, just a woman in a simple dress, earning her keep with honest work. "Suits you," Elias said from the doorway. He'd been watching her, she realized, and felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I haven't properly thanked you for the fabric." "You thanked me by making something fine with it." He cleared his throat. "I'm riding to check the north pasture. Storm might have damaged the fence. I'll come with you." He raised an eyebrow. "Can you ride?" "My father taught me, before." She trailed off, but lifted her chin. "I can ride." He saddled a gentle mare alongside his gray, and they set off into the crisp morning. The storm had left the world crystalline, every leaf and stone washed bright. Rosalie had forgotten the freedom of horseback, the way the world opened up when seen from the saddle. They rode in comfortable silence, following deer trails through stands of aspen that whispered secrets in the breeze. At the north pasture, they worked side by side repairing the fence. Elias showed her how to stretch wire tight, how to secure posts that would withstand winter snow. She tore her new dress on a barbed strand and expected disappointment, but he merely pulled thread and needle from his saddlebag. "Soldier's skill," he said, mending the tear with neat stitches. "Had to keep ourselves together between battles. You never speak of the men you served with." His hand stilled. "Most are dead, the rest." He resumed sewing. "War makes brothers of men, then sends them home strangers. We knew each other only in horror. Hard to maintain friendship built on that foundation." She understood. Some bonds were forged in darkness and couldn't survive the light. As autumn approached, their days fell into rhythm. Morning chores, afternoon rides, evening meals shared in growing warmth. Rosalie learned to read Elias's moods, when memories pressed too close and he needed solitude, when nightmares left him hollow-eyed and grateful for her quiet presence. He learned hers as well, never pressing when she went silent, offering distraction when the past loomed too large. One evening, she found him at the table with a book spread before him, brow furrowed in concentration. Moving closer, she saw columns of numbers, calculations scratched in pencil. "Accounts," he said ruefully. "Never was much good with figures. James always handled—" He stopped, jaw tightening at his brother's name. "I could help," she offered. "My mother taught me. Said a woman should understand numbers, even if men pretended otherwise." He pushed the ledger toward her, and she bent over the pages. The lamplight caught in her hair, loose from its usual braid, and Elias found himself studying the curve of her neck, the determined set of her mouth as she worked. When had looking at her become necessary as breathing? "You've been losing money on the cattle sales," she said, breaking his reverie. "This buyer's cheating you." He leaned closer, following her finger as she traced the calculations. Her warmth, the faint scent of soap and sunshine that clung to her, made it hard to focus on numbers. "See here? He's paying you for average weight but taking your best stock." "Never noticed," he admitted. "Always just took what was offered." She looked up, their faces suddenly inches apart. "You're too trusting." "Maybe I was." His voice dropped low. "Not anymore." The air between them crackled like lightning about to strike. Rosalie's breath caught. His eyes dropped to her lips, and she swayed toward him unconsciously. Then a log shifted in the fireplace, breaking the spell, and they pulled apart. The dishes need." She fled to the kitchen, hands shaking. That night, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hunger in his gaze, felt the heat of his nearness. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was married, even if abandoned. He'd offered shelter. Not whatever this was becoming. But as days passed, the tension only grew. Accidental touches lingered. Conversations drifted into dangerous territory. She caught him watching her as she worked, and knew her own eyes betrayed similar hunger. The breaking point came during an early snow. Fat flakes fell like feathers as they worked to bring the cattle closer to shelter. One stubborn calf had wandered into a ravine, and Rosalie climbed down to guide it out while Elias watched from above. The calf panicked, kicking out. She dodged, but her foot caught on a root. The world tilted, and she tumbled hard, pain shooting through her ankle. Elias was beside her in seconds, having half slid, half climbed down the ravine. "Don't move," he ordered, hands gentle but sure as they examined her injury. "The calf. Devil take the calf." His control cracked, revealing raw fear beneath. "You could have broken your neck." "But I didn't." She touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble, the tension in his jaw. "I'm all right, Elias." He caught her hand, pressing it harder against his cheek. "When I saw you fall," his voice broke. "I can't lose anyone else. Rosalie, I can't." "You won't," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm staying." He carried her back to the cabin, her arms around his neck, face buried against his shoulder. Inside, he settled her in the chair and knelt to remove her boot, hands impossibly gentle. The ankle was swollen but not broken. "Just a sprain," he said, but didn't rise from his knees. His hands still cradled her foot, thumbs tracing absent patterns on her ankle. "Elias," his name came out breathless. He looked up, and she saw everything in his eyes: loneliness, hunger, fear, hope. "I'm trying to be honorable," he said roughly. "You're under my protection. You're married. I should what? Keep pretending we're just two people sharing a roof? That I don't lie awake wanting?" She couldn't finish, heat flooding her face. "Rosalie," her name was prayer and curse both. "You don't understand. I don't know how to be gentle anymore. The war took that from me." She leaned forward, framing his face with both hands. "Then we'll learn together." He surged up, capturing her mouth with desperate hunger. The kiss was awkward, unpracticed. Two people who'd forgotten this language struggling to remember. His hands tangled in her hair, and she made a sound that destroyed his last restraint. He pulled her from the chair, and she went willingly despite her injured ankle. They stumbled to his bed, hands shaking as they worked at buttons and laces. When skin finally met skin, both trembled like aspens in wind. "I've never," she whispered against his throat. "I know," he said, stroking her hair. "We'll go slow. We have time." But slow was impossible with years of loneliness demanding payment. They came together with graceless urgency, all fumbling hands and bitten-off gasps. He tried to be careful, but she pulled him closer, needing the weight of him, the proof that she was wanted, chosen, worthy of desire. Afterward, they lay entwined, breathing gradually steadying. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in forgiveness. "I'm sorry," he said into the darkness. "That wasn't. You deserved better." She found his hand, laced their fingers together. "It was perfect because it was us. We're not perfect people, Elias. We're broken and mended and broken again, but we're here, together." He pulled her closer, and she felt moisture on his face. This strong, silent man was crying for his brother, for the boy he'd been before war, for the unexpected gift of her presence in his life. "I love you," he whispered, the words rusty with disuse. "God help me, I think I've loved you since that night in the churchyard." "And I love you," she replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. Not from gratitude or obligation, just love. They made love again as dawn approached, slower this time, learning each other's rhythms and responses. Every touch was revelation. every sigh a small victory over the voices that said they deserved only loneliness. When morning came full and bright, they rose together to tend the animals and check the fence and perform all the daily tasks that kept life moving forward. But everything had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by casual touches, shared smiles, the deep contentment of two souls no longer alone in the wilderness. That night, as snow continued to fall, Elias pulled out his brother's old fiddle. He played clumsily at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory returned. Rosalie sang along, her voice clear and true, and their music rose through the chimney smoke to meet the stars. They were still broken people with complicated pasts. Come spring, the world would intrude with its rules and judgments. But for now, in their mountain sanctuary, they had found something worth any price, each other. The morning after brought a cold that seemed to seep into the cabin's very bones. Rosalie woke alone, the space beside her already cool, and felt the first tendril of doubt creep in. Through the window, she could see Elias by the woodpile, splitting logs with violent precision, his breath clouding in the frigid air. She dressed quickly and started breakfast, but her hands trembled as she worked. The intimacy of the night before felt like a dream in the harsh morning light. What had she done? She was a married woman, abandoned or not. And Elias, what must he think of her now? When he finally came inside, he wouldn't meet her eyes. He ate in silence, the easy companionship of recent weeks replaced by a tension that made her stomach churn. Finally, she couldn't bear it. If you regret what happened, no. The word came sharp and fast. He looked up then, and she saw not regret but fear in his storm-gray eyes. I regret nothing about you, Rosalie. Only. He pushed back from the table, began pacing like a caged wolf. I've been selfish, taking advantage of your situation, your gratitude. She stood, anger flaring. You think I shared your bed from gratitude? What else could it be? He turned on her, anguish written across his features. You're young, beautiful, full of life. I'm a broken soldier hiding on a mountain, jumping at thunder, talking to ghosts. What could you possibly want with... She crossed to him in 2 strides and kissed him hard, silencing his self-recrimination. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. I want the man who saw my shame and said it was over, she said fiercely. The man who gave me dignity when the world tried to strip it away. The man who trusts me with his ledgers and his nightmares and his brother's fiddle. She touched his face gently. I want you, Elias Ward, not from gratitude, not from desperation, because you see me as I am and don't look away. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. Rosalie. But if you're going to punish yourself every time we're together, if you're going to retreat into guilt and silence, her voice broke, then perhaps I should leave after all. No. He pulled her against him, held her as if she might vanish. No, please, I don't know how to do this, how to be happy, how to believe I deserve. Neither do I, she admitted against his chest. But maybe we can learn, together. They stood that way for a long moment, relearning how to breathe the same air. Finally, he pulled back enough to meet her eyes. No more running? She asked. No more running. He confirmed. Though I may stumble now and then we'll stumble together. The days that followed were a careful dance of approach and retreat. They shared his bed each night, learning the language of desire with growing fluency. But daylight brought new negotiations. How to be lovers when they'd barely learned to be friends. How to build something lasting on a foundation that had begun with rescue and refuge. Rosalie discovered that Elias's morning distance wasn't rejection, but a kind of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Was his would stay. She learned to be patient with his disbelief, to prove her presence with small gestures and steady warmth. Elias discovered that Rosalie's occasional silences weren't unhappiness, but processing. Moments when the reality of her transformation from discarded bride to chosen woman overwhelmed her. He learned to sit with her in those silences, offering his presence without demands. One afternoon, as she mended a tear in his shirt. Rosalie found herself humming her mother's lullabies. The needle stilled in her hands as memory washed over her, not the harsh recent past, but the sweetness of childhood, before loss and hardship. "She would have liked you," she said softly. Elias looked up from the harness he was repairing. "Your mother. She always said the measure of a man wasn't in his words but his actions, in how he treated those who couldn't benefit him." She resumed sewing. "You took in a ruined woman with nothing to offer, gave her dignity and purpose, and—" She paused, then continued with a small smile. "And eventually, your heart. She would have liked you very much. I wish I could have met her," he said simply. "Could have asked her permission proper-like." The words hung between them, acknowledging what they both knew, that their union, however true, existed outside society's blessing. She was legally bound to another. He was an outcast by choice. There would be no church wedding, no social recognition, no simple path forward. "Do you think about him?" Elias asked suddenly. "Your husband?" Rosalie set aside the mending. "Sometimes, not with longing. How could I long for a stranger who bought me to settle a debt? But I wonder at his cruelty. Why marry me at all if he had no intention?" She shrugged. "Perhaps humiliation was payment enough for whatever grievance he held against my uncle. Men like that." Elias's jaw tightened. "They feed on others' pain, make themselves feel powerful by making others feel small. Is that what you did in the war? Make others feel small?" He flinched as if struck. "No, in war, there's no time for such games. You kill or die, simple as that. But after—" He stared at his hands. "After, you carry every face, every young boy calling for his mother, every—" He stopped, shaking his head. She moved to kneel before him, taking those haunted hands in hers. "That's the difference between you and men like Josiah Briggs. You carry the weight of what you've done. He probably sleeps sound as a babe. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me weak." "It makes you human," she corrected. "It makes you worth loving." That night, she dreamed of her mother for the first time in years. Not the fevered, dying woman, but the vibrant heart of their small home, teaching Rosalie to braid bread, to read accounts, to walk with her head high regardless of circumstances. "Are you happy, my girl?" her mother asked in the dream. "I don't know," Rosalie answered honestly. "Is it wrong to be happy when everything about it is improper?" Her mother smiled, that wise, knowing expression Rosalie had treasured. "Propriety is a luxury for those who've never been hungry, never been broken, never had to choose between survival and society's approval. You chose life, my darling. Choose it every day." She woke to find Elias watching her, concern creasing his brow. "You were crying in your sleep." "Happy tears," she assured him, wiping her cheeks. "I dreamed of my mother." He pulled her close, and she told him about the dream, about her mother's wisdom and warmth. He shared his own memories, teaching his younger brother to fish, their mother's apple pie. The farm before war called him away. "Do you think they'd forgive us?" he asked into the darkness. "Our families, for finding happiness in all this mess? I think they'd want us to forgive ourselves first." Rosalie said. They made love then with a tenderness born of shared grief and tentative hope. Every touch was a promise, every whispered endearment a small act of faith. When release came, Rosalie found herself weeping, not from shame or sorrow, but from the overwhelming realization that she was healing. They both were. Afterward, as dawn crept across the mountains, Elias traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Come spring, we could head west, California, Oregon territory, somewhere no one knows our names or our stories. Start fresh." The offer hung between them, shimmering with possibility. A new life, free from the shadows of Cedar Ridge and its judgments, but also an acknowledgement that their happiness here was fragile, temporary, built in hiding. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "To run again?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I want to walk down a street with you and not worry who's watching. Want to introduce you as my wife without explanations or lies. Want to give you the life you deserve, not this." He gestured at the cabin, their isolated sanctuary. "This is the life I choose," she said firmly. "Here, there, anywhere, as long as it's with you. But Elias?" She turned to face him fully. "We can't run from what we are to each other. Married or not, blessed or not, proper or not, this is real. This is ours." "Then we stay." Hope and uncertainty warred in his voice. "For now, until we decide together what comes next." She kissed him softly. "No more decisions made in isolation. We're partners now." "Partners," he repeated, testing the word. Then, with growing conviction, "Yes, partners." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing their mountain refuge in pristine white. Inside, two hearts slowly learned to beat as one, building a future on the ashes of their separate pasts, choosing love over shame, connection over isolation, each other over all the world's harsh judgments. The rider appeared just as the first green shoots pushed through the melting snow, bringing with him the stench of the valley below and memories Rosalie had tried to bury. She recognized him immediately. Cousin Marcus, her aunt's eldest son, who'd laughed loudest when they'd tied her to the fence post. She was hanging wash when the sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Elias was in the high pasture checking on new calves. Wouldn't be back until dusk. Her hands tightened on the wet cloth as Marcus dismounted, his eyes taking in her simple dress, her work-worn hands, the small signs of a life being lived. Well, little Rosalie, playing house with her savior. His smile held all the warmth of a snake's. "Aunt Sarah's been worried sick about you." "Has she now?" Rosalie kept her voice steady, though her heart raced. "Strange, she didn't worry when Uncle Silas sold me like livestock." Marcus's expression hardened. "You brought shame on this family, girl, running off with some drifter, living in sin. I was abandoned by my legal husband on our wedding day." She interrupted. "What sin is greater, seeking shelter or offering cruelty?" He stepped closer, and she smelled whiskey on his breath. "Don't matter how you dress it up. You're a married woman living with a man not your husband. There's words for women like that. Say them then." She lifted her chin, finding steel she didn't know she possessed. "Say your words and be gone. You have no power here." His face flushed ugly red. "We'll see about power. There's a man in town willing to pay good money for a wife, even a soiled one. Josiah Briggs might have run off, but the marriage papers still stand. Uncle Silas has the right to bring you back, auction you off again." "I won't go." The words came firm. "Certain. Won't you?" Marcus grabbed her arm, fingers digging deep. "You think your mountain man can protect you from the law? From family rights? Take your hand off her." Elias's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood at the corner of the cabin, rifle casual in his hands but aimed steady at Marcus's chest. His eyes held the flat, deadly calm of a man who'd killed before and would again if needed. Marcus released her arm but didn't retreat. "This ain't your business, mister. Family matter. The lady lives under my roof, eats at my table, shares my name in all but law. That makes everything about her my business." Elias moved closer, the rifle never wavering. "You've delivered your message. Time to go." "She's married legal," Marcus sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can do many things." Elias's smile was winter cold. "Things learned in places that would turn your hair white. Want a demonstration?" Marcus backed toward his horse, bravado crumbling. "This ain't over. Uncle Silas has friends, connections. We'll be back with the sheriff if need be. Come with an army if you like." Elias chambered around, the sound sharp in the mountain air. "But come prepared for what you'll find." After Marcus's horse disappeared down the trail, Elias lowered the rifle and pulled Rosalie into his arms. She was shaking, rage and fear tangled together. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door." "Our door," he corrected. "And trouble was always coming. Men like that, they can't stand seeing others rise from the ash they tried to bury them in." They spent the night planning, weighing options. Leave now, before Silas could gather his forces. Stay and fight for the life they'd built. Rosalie thought of the garden she'd just planted, the quilt she was piecing from scraps, the home they'd made from a simple cabin. Running felt like surrender. "I won't be driven out," she said finally. "Not by them. Not again." Elias studied her in the lamplight. "You're sure? This could get ugly. Your uncle strikes me as the type to hold grudges, mean and long. Then we face it together. Isn't that what partners do?" 3 days later, they came. Sheriff Garrett, a man with kind eyes but duty-bound shoulders, accompanied by Uncle Silas and 2 deputies. Rosalie met them on the porch, Elias beside her, both dressed in their best clothes as if for church. "Miss Thornton, excuse me, Mrs. Briggs," the sheriff began uncomfortably. "Your uncle here claims you've been taken against your will, that this man," he gestured at Elias, "has compromised you and refuses to return you to your rightful family." "Sheriff Garrett," Rosalie's voice rang clear and strong, "I stand here of my own free will. I was abandoned by my lawful husband on our wedding day, left tied to a fence post for the amusement of the town. Mr. Ward showed me Christian charity when my own bloodkin showed only cruelty." "Lying Jezebel," Silas spat. "She's been living in sin. Sheriff, defiling the sanctity of marriage." "The sanctity you sold for 20 head of cattle?" Rosalie stepped forward. "The marriage you arranged without my consent to clear your drinking debts." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Nevertheless, ma'am, you are legally married. Your husband could return any day to claim you." "Then let him come," Elias said quietly. "But until that unlikely day, Mrs. Briggs remains here under my protection. Unless you have a warrant, Sheriff, I'll ask you to leave our property." "Now see here," Silas started forward, but Elias's hand moved to his sidearm, stopping him cold. "Silas," the sheriff warned, "the man's within his rights. Without evidence of a crime or a formal complaint from the legal husband, I can't force anyone anywhere." He turned to Rosalie. "Ma'am, I need to hear it from you plain. Are you here against your will?" "I'm here because it's the only place I've ever been treated with dignity and respect," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm here because I choose to be." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then I reckon that settles it. Silas, time to go." "This ain't finished." Silas's face was purple with rage. "That girl owes me. I owe you nothing." Rosalie's voice could have cut glass. "You took my inheritance when my parents died. You worked me like a servant in my own home. You sold me to settle your debts. Whatever obligation family blood might have created, you destroyed long ago. Come on, Silas." The sheriff was already mounting his horse. "Leave these folks be." But Silas had one more card to play. "What about when I write to Briggs? Tell him his wife's been living with another man. He paid good money. He'll want what's his. Then I'll deal with Josiah Briggs," Elias said calmly. "Man to man. And Thornton, if you or yours come near Rosalie again, you'll deal with me. That's not a threat. It's a promise carved in stone." They watched the group ride away, Silas still cursing and threatening. When they were gone, Rosalie sagged against Elias, the strength that had carried her through draining away. "You are magnificent," he murmured into her hair. "A warrior queen defending her castle." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But also free. For the first time, I stood up to them, claimed my choice." "How does it feel?" She pulled back to look at him, this man who'd given her not just shelter, but the courage to fight for herself. "Like flying." They celebrated quietly that night, sharing a bottle of wine Elias had been saving, dancing to his brother's fiddle in their small cabin. But both knew this was merely the first skirmish. Silas wouldn't give up easily. And somewhere out there, Josiah Briggs held papers that claimed her as property. "We could still leave," Elias offered as they lay entwined. "Head west like we discussed. After planting season," Rosalie said firmly. "I want to see my garden bloom at least once. Want to prove we're not running from fear but choosing our own path. And if Briggs comes..." She was quiet for a moment, then turned to face him fully. "Then we face him, together. I won't live looking over my shoulder." Elias won't let fear of what might happen steal what we have now." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and admiration into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, he whispered, "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "We found each other," she corrected. "Two broken souls who refused to stay buried." Spring bloomed full around their mountain sanctuary, bringing wildflowers and warming winds. Rosalie tended her garden with fierce joy, coaxing life from soil that had known only neglect. Elias expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen, building a future plank by plank. They loved with the intensity of those who'd known loss, treasured each sunrise, each shared meal, each night wrapped in each other's arms. The threat of Silas's return, of Briggs's potential claim, lurked at the edges of their happiness, but they refused to let shadows steal their light. "Whatever comes," Elias told her one evening as they watched stars emerge above the peaks, "we'll face it standing up. No more shame, no more running." "No more shame," Rosalie agreed, lacing her fingers through his. "Only this, only us, only the life we choose." And in choosing each other, in claiming their right to happiness despite all who would deny it, they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered. The letter came with the autumn leaves, delivered by a traveling merchant who seemed relieved to be rid of it. Rosalie's hands trembled as she recognized the legal seal, the formal script that spoke of distant courtrooms and cold justice. But it wasn't what she'd feared. No summons from Josiah Briggs, no demands from Uncle Silas. Instead, it bore news that changed everything. Briggs was dead, killed in a saloon fight in Nevada, and with him died any legal claim to a marriage that had lasted less than an hour. "You're free," Elias said softly, reading over her shoulder. "Truly free. Free." The word felt foreign on her tongue, too large to grasp all at once. She sank into a chair, the letter crumpling in her grip, and found herself crying, not from sorrow, but from the sheer relief of chains she hadn't fully acknowledged finally breaking. Elias knelt beside her, gathering her hands in his. "Rosalie, talk to me." "I didn't realize," she whispered, "how heavy it was, that paper bond to a stranger, even knowing he'd abandoned me, even living here with you. Some part of me was still that girl tied to a fence post, belonging to anyone but herself. And now," she met his storm-gray eyes, saw her future reflected there. "Now I belong only to me, which means I can give myself freely to you, if you'll have me. Not as shelter from storm, not as refugee or burden, but as a woman who chooses you with her whole heart. If I'll have you?" His laugh was rough with emotion. "Rosalie, I've been yours since the moment I cut those ropes. The question is whether you'll have me, a broken soldier with too many ghosts, hiding on a mountain because the world got too loud." "Yes," she said simply. "Today, tomorrow, always, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a meadow blazing with aspen gold. The mountains standing witness to vows spoken true. No crowds to mock, no family to sell or shame, just them. The traveling preacher who'd agreed to climb the mountain, and old Samuel from the neighboring ranch who'd become their friend over the summer months. Rosalie wore a dress she'd made herself from sky-blue wool Elias had ridden 2 days to find. He wore his cavalry uniform, cleaned and pressed, the first time he'd put it on without nightmares clawing at his throat. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elias whispered against her lips, "Let them mock. You are my bride now, not theirs." That night, in their cabin transformed with wildflowers and candlelight, they came together as truly married folk. There was nothing hurried or desperate now, no fear of judgment or discovery. They took their time, mapping each other with newfound freedom, speaking love in touches and sighs and whispered promises. "My wife," Elias murmured against her throat, testing the words like prayer. "My husband," she answered, arching beneath him, claiming the title she'd never thought to own with joy. They moved together in the dancing shadows, two souls who'd found their way through darkness into light. When release claimed them, Rosalie cried again, tears of joy this time, of completion. of coming home to herself and finding him there waiting. Winter arrived early and harsh, but they were ready. The root cellar bulged with preserves and stored vegetables from Rosalie's garden. Elias had expanded the barn and secured their stock. They'd laid in supplies enough to weather any storm, their partnership now including the practical rhythms of shared survival. On the longest night of the year, as snow piled deep against the windows and wind howled like hungry wolves, Elias taught Rosalie to play chess by firelight. She proved a quick study, soon beating him as often as not, her strategic mind finding patterns he'd missed. "You'd have made a fine officer," he told her after a particularly clever defeat. "I prefer being a rancher's wife," she said, resetting the board. "Though perhaps we should consider expanding. That bottom acreage would support more cattle, maybe some sheep." He smiled at her use of we, at how naturally she'd claimed partnership in their future. "Already thinking like a frontier woman. What would your aunt say?" "Nothing I'd care to hear." Her expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about them, though. Not with anger anymore, just pity. They're still trapped in their small lives, their small hatreds. They tried to bury me, but couldn't imagine I'd grow like those seeds that need fire to sprout," Elias said. "Destruction becomes creation. Is that what we are, fireborn?" "Maybe so." He reached across the board to capture her hand. "Forged in flames, tempered by trials, stronger for the burning." Spring brought unexpected visitors, a young couple, barely more than children, who'd heard whispers of a place where broken souls could heal. The girl, Lucy, bore bruises that spoke of a harsh home life. The boy, Thomas, had the hollow eyes of one who'd seen too much too young. "Please," Lucy begged, standing on their porch with nothing but the clothes on her back. "We heard you help people, that you don't judge." Rosalie and Elias exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. Then Rosalie stepped aside. "Come in. You're safe here." They stayed a week, helping with chores while they recovered their strength and made plans. Rosalie taught Lucy to preserve meat and mend clothes with tiny, strong stitches. Elias showed Thomas how to repair fences and tend cattle, skills that would serve him anywhere. When they left, heading west with supplies and a letter of introduction to a rancher Elias knew in Wyoming, Lucy hugged Rosalie tight. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved yourselves by leaving," Rosalie corrected. "We just offered a place to catch your breath." After they'd gone, Elias found Rosalie on the porch, watching the trail where they'd disappeared. "No regrets about helping them?" "How could I regret passing on what was given to us?" She leaned into his warmth. "You showed me grace when I needed it most. Seems only right to offer the same to others." "Careful," he teased gently. "We'll end up running a station for every runaway bride and lost soul in the territory." "Would that be so terrible?" He considered, then smiled. "No, not terrible at all." Summer bloomed lush and green, the harsh winter forgotten in abundance. Their ranch prospered, the cattle healthy, the garden overflowing. Rosalie had taken to keeping bees, their gentle hum adding music to the mountain air. Elias built her a proper henhouse and surprised her with a milk cow named Buttercup. On their first wedding anniversary, they rode to the highest meadow on their land, spreading a blanket among the columbines and Indian paintbrush. The valley spread below them, Cedar Ridge a distant smudge that no longer held power over their happiness. "I have something for you," Elias said, producing a small wrapped package. Inside was a gold locket, simple but fine. Rosalie opened it to find 2 tiny photographs, one of them on their wedding day, the other of the cabin with its garden in full bloom. "So you can carry home with you always," he explained. "Oh, Elias." She kissed him soundly, then laughed. "And here I thought my gift was special." She handed him a folded paper. He opened it, read, and his eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "The doctor in town confirmed it last week." She placed his hand on her still flat belly. "Come spring, we'll have a new addition to our mountain family." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt him tremble and knew he wept. This man who'd thought himself too broken for family, for future, for hope. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. "Happy?" He pulled back to frame her face with gentle hands. "Rosalie, you've given me everything I never dared dream of. A home, a purpose, a love that heals old wounds. And now a child? I'm not happy. I'm reborn." They stayed in the meadow until stars began to appear, planning and dreaming aloud. Boy or girl? Either was perfect. Names? James for a boy. After Elias's brother, Clara for a girl. After Rosalie's mother. The cabin would need expanding again. Perhaps they'd add a second story. As they rode home through purple twilight, Rosalie marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From shame to joy. From bondage to freedom. From isolation to partnership and soon parenthood. The girl who'd stood in borrowed wedding clothes, abandoned and mocked, seemed like a stranger now, or perhaps simply an earlier draft of who she was meant to become. "No more looking back," Elias said, as if reading her thoughts. "Only forward now." "Only forward," she agreed, reaching across the space between their horses to catch his hand. Together. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, their true bed, blessed and chosen, Elias placed reverent hands on her belly. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to our mountain. Welcome to our love." And in that moment, Rosalie knew with bone-deep certainty that every trial had been worth it. Every humiliation, every tear, every moment of despair had led to this. A love that transformed, a home that sheltered, a future bright with promise. They'd found their happy ending not in spite of their broken beginnings, but because of them. Two wounded souls who'd refused to stay down, who'd chosen healing over hatred, love over fear, and their story was only just beginning. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, earlier and fiercer than any in memory. The first blizzard struck in late October, catching everyone unprepared. Elias had been moving the cattle to lower pasture when the storm hit, and by the time he made it back to the cabin, his lips were blue and his hands barely functional. Rosalie helped him from his frozen clothes, her own hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. She'd seen men lose fingers to frostbite, seen whole families frozen in their beds when wood ran out. But she pushed the thoughts away, focusing on warming water, on wrapping Elias in every blanket they owned, on the life growing inside her that demanded she be strong. "The cattle," he muttered through chattering teeth. "Lost at least 6 in the ravine. Wolves will get the rest if—" "The cattle can wait," she said firmly, pressing a cup of hot broth to his lips. "You can't help them if you're dead." By November, they were truly snowbound. Drifts piled higher than the windows, and the path to the barn required daily digging. Their carefully stored supplies dwindled faster than anticipated. Rosalie rationed obsessively, cutting their meals in half, then quarters, always ensuring Elias got the larger portion. "You need to eat more," he argued, gesturing at her growing belly. The baby needs a father who doesn't starve," she countered. "We'll make do." But making do grew harder as December deepened. The henhouse roof collapsed under snow weight, killing half their chickens. Wolves, made bold by hunger, took 2 calves despite Elias's vigilance. When he went to check the remaining herd one gray afternoon, he came back bleeding from a deep gash where a wolf had caught him off guard. Rosalie cleaned and stitched the wound with hands that didn't shake until after he'd fallen into fitful sleep. Then she allowed herself 5 minutes of silent tears before squaring her shoulders. There was wood to be split, animals to tend, a husband to heal, and a child to protect. Tears were a luxury they couldn't afford. The fever came 3 days later. "Just need rest," Elias mumbled, but his skin burned beneath her touch, and the wound had an angry red look that made her stomach clench. She used their dwindling medical supplies carefully, the carbolic acid, the willow bark tea, the precious bottle of laudanum they'd been saving. She melted snow endlessly for fresh water, changed his bandages every few hours, and spooned broth between his cracked lips when he'd take it. On the 4th night, his fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed and called out, lost in memories of battlefields, crying for men long dead. Rosalie held him through it all, her voice hoarse from singing the lullabies her mother had once sung, from talking him back from whatever horrors gripped him. "Stay with me," she whispered against his burning forehead. "You saved me, Elias Ward. Now let me save you." Dawn brought a break in the fever, but also new crisis. They were nearly out of firewood. What remained might last 2 days. 3, if she was careful. The woodpile lay buried beneath 15 feet of snow, and she was 6 months pregnant, already struggling with balance on clear ground. But the choice was simple: dig or die. She wrapped herself in every layer they owned and set to work. The first hour yielded nothing but exhaustion. The second brought cramping that made her pause. Hands pressed to her belly, whispering apologies to the child within. By the third hour, her hands were raw despite the gloves, and she'd uncovered only a few logs. "What are you doing?" Elias's voice, weak but lucid, came from the doorway. He leaned heavily against the frame, barely upright but conscious. "Getting wood," she said simply, not stopping her digging. "Go back to bed. Rosalie, stop. You'll hurt yourself. The baby. The baby will freeze if I don't get wood." She threw another shovelful aside. "So will you. So will I. This is what we do. Elias, we survive." He stumbled forward, reaching for the shovel. She held it away from him. "You can barely stand. Let me do this. Together then," he said stubbornly. "That's what partners do." They worked side by side, him scraping weakly at the snow while she did the heavy lifting. It took all day to reach the woodpile, all the next to haul enough inside to last a week. Elias's wound reopened twice, and Rosalie's back screamed constant protest. But they persisted. That night, crowded close to their hard-won fire. Elias took her blistered hands in his. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." "I'm tired," she admitted, too exhausted for anything but truth. "Scared. What if the snow doesn't stop? What if—" "Then we face it," he interrupted gently. "Like we faced your uncle. Like we faced the wolves. One day, one challenge at a time." January brought a brief thaw, enough to check on the surviving cattle and hunt for game. Elias, still weak but mobile, managed to bring down an elk that would see them through several weeks. Rosalie smoked the meat carefully, wasting nothing, while he reinforced the barn against future storms. "We should name him James," she said one evening, hands resting on her belly as the baby kicked vigorously. "After your brother, give the name new life, new chances." Elias's eyes misted. "He would have liked you, would have teased me merciless about falling for a woman too good for me." "Or Clara," she continued. "If it's a girl, after my mother, strong women looking after their own, like you've looked after me." He moved behind her chair, hands gentle on her shoulders. "I haven't said it enough, how grateful I am, not just for the nursing, but for the strength you showed. Lesser folk would have panicked, given up. Lesser folk didn't have you to save," she said simply. "February's storms were worse than December's. They lost more cattle, watched their food stores shrink to dangerous levels. Rosalie mixed sawdust with their flour to stretch it, made soup from bones they'd already boiled twice. Her belly grew despite the poor rations, the baby taking what it needed and leaving her increasingly weak. One night, as wind howled like all the demons of hell, she woke to wetness and pain. Too early, 2 months too early, but the baby didn't know calendars, didn't care about timing. "Elias," she gasped, gripping his arm. "The baby's coming?" His face went white, but his voice stayed steady. "All right, we've faced worse. We can do this." They couldn't, and both knew it. No midwife could reach them through the storms. Their medical supplies were nearly gone. The baby was early, and early babies in these mountains rarely survived. But they pretended confidence for each other, moving through preparations with grim determination. The labor was long and difficult. Rosalie bit through a leather strap to keep from screaming, aware that panic would help nothing. Elias did his best with what he'd learned from helping birth calves and foals, his hands steady even as sweat poured down his face. "I can see the head," he said after hours that felt like days. "You're almost there. Love, one more push." The baby came in a rush of blood and fluid, tiny and purple and terrifyingly still. Elias cleared its mouth, rubbed its chest, breathed his own air into lungs the size of walnuts. Nothing. Rosalie reached for her child with arms that shook from exhaustion and blood loss. "Give him to me," she whispered. She held the tiny form against her chest. This son who would never know his name, never see the mountains that would have been his home. Elias wrapped them both in his arms, and they grieved together as the storm raged outside. Two souls who'd survived so much finally broken by this smallest, greatest loss. They buried him when the weather cleared, in a spot where wildflowers would bloom come spring. James Elias Ward, beloved son, lived 1 hour. The wooden marker seemed pitifully small against the vastness of mountain and sky. Rosalie bled for days after, weakness keeping her bedbound while Elias tended everything alone. He was gentle with her, patient with her silence, but she saw how he stood sometimes at the window, staring at nothing, hands clenched into fists. "It's my fault," she said one gray afternoon. "If I hadn't worked so hard, Stop!" His voice was fierce. "You did what you had to do to keep us all alive. The fault lies with this hard land, this cruel winter, not with you. I couldn't save him. Neither could I." He sat on the bed beside her, gathering her carefully into his arms. "We couldn't save him, but we saved each other. That has to count for something." March arrived with tentative warmth, melting snow revealing the winter's toll. They'd lost over half their herd, most of their chickens, and their son, but they'd survived, scarred, grieving, but breathing. As Rosalie stood at James's grave, placing the first wildflowers of spring against the marker, she felt Elias's presence behind her. "I'm not sure I can do this again," she admitted. "Risk so much, lose so much." "I know," he said quietly. "But look." He gestured at the valley below, where green pushed through brown, where life insisted despite death. "It comes back, always comes back. Maybe we can too." She leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They'd been tested by fire and ice, by loss and pain, and somehow remained standing. Not unbroken, they'd never be that again, but undefeated. "Together?" she asked. "Always together," he confirmed. As they walked back to their cabin, hands linked, Rosalie thought of the girl she'd been, abandoned, shamed, hopeless. That girl could never have survived this winter, this loss. But the woman she'd become, forged in hardship and tempered by love, could face whatever came next. The mountains had taken their toll, but they'd also given gifts, strength, resilience, and a love that could weather any storm. And spring, like hope, was already beginning to bloom. Spring came slowly to the mountain that year, as if the earth itself grieved with them. But come it did, painting the slopes with Indian paintbrush and columbine, filling the air with birdsong and the sound of rushing snowmelt. Rosalie threw herself into the work of resurrection, replanting the garden, rebuilding the henhouse, coaxing life from soil that had known too much death. She wrote a letter to her family on a morning when the sun finally held real warmth, not to Uncle Silas or Aunt Sarah, they were no family of hers, but to a cousin in Missouri who'd been kind once, before life scattered them like seeds on hard ground. "Dear Martha," she wrote in careful script, "I am alive and well, living on a ranch in the Colorado mountains with my husband, Elias Ward. Yes, I know what you must have heard, but the truth is far different from Cedar Ridge's gossip. I was not stolen or corrupted. I was saved." She told the story simply. The abandonment, the rescue, the love that grew slow and strong as mountain pine. She wrote of the winter that nearly broke them, the sun they'd lost, the strength they'd found. She sealed it with wax from their precious candles and gave it to the supply wagon that came through monthly now that the passes were clear. "Why tell them anything?" Elias asked, watching the wagon disappear down the trail. "Because I'm not ashamed anymore," she said. "Let them know I survived. Let them know I'm happy. Maybe it will give some other girl hope when her world collapses." Summer brought unexpected bounty. The garden exploded with growth, as if the earth sought to apologize for winter's cruelty. Their surviving cattle multiplied, twin calves appearing like miracles in the dawn. Elias built a new room onto the cabin. "For storage," he said, but she caught him sometimes standing in the doorway, looking at the empty space with soft eyes. They worked dawn to dusk, saving every penny, building their small empire board by board and stone by stone. The ranch that had barely sustained two now showed promise of prosperity. Neighbors came to buy Rosalie's preserves and honey, Elias's well-trained horses. Their reputation spread. Honest folk who dealt fair and helped those in need. One August evening, as they sat on the porch watching thunderheads build over distant peaks, Elias cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what you said, about trying again." Rosalie's hands stilled on the quilt she was mending. They hadn't spoken of children since the burial, the wound too raw for words. "Not now," he continued quickly. "Not until you're ready. If you're ever ready. But I wanted you to know, if you want to try again, I'm with you. If you don't, I'm with you still. You're enough. Rosalie, just you is more than enough." She set aside the quilt and moved to sit beside him on the step. "I dream about him sometimes. How he'd be learning to crawl now, reaching for everything, putting it all in his mouth. I know, I do too. But lately," she took a breath, choosing words carefully. "Lately I dream about other things too. A daughter with your eyes, a son with my stubbornness, the cabin full of voices besides our own." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "There's no rush. We have time." "Time," she repeated softly. Once she'd thought she had none, no future beyond shame and servitude. Now it stretched before them, full of possibility. September brought a letter that changed everything, Martha had written back, but tucked inside her reply was another envelope, official and sealed. Rosalie's hands trembled as she opened it. "It's from a lawyer in Denver," she told Elias. "My father, he had a brother I never knew about, died last year in California, gold mines." She looked up, eyes wide. "He left everything to his next of kin. That's me." The inheritance wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. Enough to buy the neighboring ranch that had stood empty since its owner died. Enough to bring in good breeding stock. Enough to build the life they'd been piecing together from scraps. "We could hire help," Elias said, studying the figures. "Build a proper barn, maybe even a school eventually, for the mountain families." "A school," Rosalie breathed. Her mother had been a teacher before marriage, had passed on that love of learning despite their limited resources. "Yes. Oh, yes." They traveled to Denver to settle the legal matters. Their first time off the mountain together, the city felt enormous after their isolation, full of noise and strangers and possibilities. Rosalie bought fabric that wasn't strictly necessary, books for winter reading, and a music box that played her mother's favorite hymn. Elias found new tools, quality seed for spring planting, and surprised her with a piano. "Every home needs music," he said, as they watched it loaded onto the freight wagon. "Besides, you'll need something to teach in that school of yours." On their last night in the city, they attended a concert at the Opera House. Rosalie wore a green silk dress that brought out her eyes. Elias in a proper suit that made him look distinguished rather than dangerous. As they entered the grand foyer, she heard whispers, saw the appreciative glances of other women at her husband, the admiring looks of men who saw only her surface beauty, not the steel beneath. "Nervous?" Elias murmured, her hand secure on his arm. "No," she realized with wonder. "They're just people. They have no power over us." After the concert, walking back to their hotel through gaslit streets, Elias suddenly stopped. "Rosalie Ward," he said formally, "would you do me the honor of renewing our vows? Here in a proper church, with flowers and music and whatever else you were denied before." She looked up at him, this man who understood that some wounds needed healing twice, that joy could be rebuilt on sorrow's foundation. "Elias Ward," she replied just as formally. "I would marry you again every day if I could, but once more will do." They were married again at sunrise in a small chapel, with the minister's wife as witness and sunlight streaming through stained glass. Rosalie wore her green silk and carried wildflowers Elias had somehow found in the city. He wore his suit and a smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. "Do you, Rosalie, take this man?" "Yes," she interrupted, making the minister chuckle. "Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Yes." The journey home took 3 days, the freight wagons slow with their purchases. They camped under stars, made love in their bedroll with the mountains watching, and planned their future with the detail of generals preparing for battle. But this was a war against entropy. Not enemies, building instead of destroying. October arrived in glory, the aspens turning gold as hope. They hosted a harvest dance in their new barn, inviting every family within riding distance. Rosalie played the piano while Elias called the dances, and children who'd never seen such plenty ate their fill of pie and cider. "Look at you," Samuel from the neighboring ranch said, pulling Elias aside. "When you first came here, you were a ghost trying to disappear. Now you're the man everyone turns to. What changed?" Elias found Rosalie in the crowd, laughing as she taught the Miller girls a new dance step. "Everything," he said simply. As winter approached, kinder this year, the almanac promised. They prepared with hard-won wisdom. The larder filled properly, the woodpile towering, the livestock sheltered securely. But the best preparation was the life growing again beneath Rosalie's heart. Discovered on a morning when frost first silvered the grass. "I'm scared," she admitted, after the doctor in town confirmed what she suspected. "So am I," Elias said. "But we're stronger now. We know what to watch for, what to avoid. And this time, we're not alone." Indeed, they weren't. The mountain families they'd helped rallied around them. The women shared wisdom and remedies. The men helped Elias with heavy work. When December came gentle and bright, Rosalie was surrounded by experienced mothers who delivered babies in circumstances just as challenging. On a clear January night, with stars brilliant in the cold sky and the midwife's steady hands guiding, Clara Sarah Ward entered the world with a cry that could have woken the mountains. She was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that announced her presence with authority. "She's strong," the midwife pronounced, handing the swaddled bundle to Rosalie. Like her mother. Elias knelt beside the bed, one finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Hello, little one," he whispered, the same words he'd spoken to the child they'd lost. But this time, bright eyes opened, focusing on his face with what Rosalie swore was recognition. "She knows you," she murmured, exhausted but triumphant. "Of course she does." His voice was thick with tears. "I've been talking to her for months, telling her about her brave mother, about the mountains that will be her playground, about her brother watching from heaven." As dawn broke, painting their peaks rose and gold, they sat together, a family forged in fire, tested by loss, stronger for the breaking. The grave on the hillside would always be there, their first child forever part of the mountain's keeping. But life, stubborn and glorious, had found a way. "Was it worth it?" Elias asked softly, as Clara nursed with determined appetite. "All of it, the pain, the fear, the loss." Rosalie looked around their cabin, at the quilt she'd made, the preserves lined on shelves, the piano waiting for small fingers to learn. She looked at their daughter, perfect and present and alive. She looked at him, her husband, her partner, her heart's true home. "Every moment," she said firmly, "every single moment led us here, and here's exactly where we belong." Outside, the sun climbed higher, setting the snow-capped peaks ablaze with light. Inside, a baby sighed in contentment. A husband and wife leaned together in quiet joy, and all was well in their mountain kingdom. They'd learned the hardest lesson the frontier could teach, that happiness wasn't found in easy circumstances, but in choosing each other again and again, in building something beautiful from whatever materials life provided. The girl once left bound and mocked had become a woman of substance and strength. The broken soldier had found his way back to wholeness. Together, they'd created a love story written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices, in shared work and whispered comfort. in the courage to keep believing that tomorrow could be better than today. And it was. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and redemption in the Old West. If you're enjoying these stories around the Wild West Campfire, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like the pioneers who bound this country together. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more authentic tales of frontier life. And please share your thoughts about Rosalie and Elias's journey. Did their story touch your heart? What would you have done in their shoes? Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to love's possibilities.